Well, Jerusalem is a roadmap of the Bible. King David, Solomon, the prophets, the Maccabees, Jesus, the Apostle Paul, all of them walked the streets of Jerusalem. And beneath the western wall of the Temple Mount, that biblical history dating back thousands of years comes to life today.
No one was supposed to see this. A camera no wider than a coin slipped through ancient stone beneath Jerusalem's Temple Mount, and when the image appeared, one researcher silently walked out.
In the Emek Zurim Park, visitors can sift through debris from the ongoing excavation in the city of David. That's where Liel Kudakop found a rare silver coin from the time of the Second Temple.
What did they see? Hidden for over 3,000 years beneath the most sacred ground on earth, the chamber revealed materials that shouldn't exist and a design that defies modern engineering. Why was it sealed so carefully? And from whom? This isn't a myth or legend. Someone looked, and now the question is whether the world is ready to know why it was hidden. The forbidden discovery. To understand what has just been discovered, you first need to understand why this discovery should have been impossible. The Temple Mount is arguably the most sensitive piece of real estate on Earth. Every stone, every grain of dust, carries the weight of competing claims and ancient grievances. The political situation is so fragile that even routine maintenance can trigger international incidents. Archaeological excavation, the kind that involves digging and probing and disturbing the earth, has been effectively banned for generations. The last serious attempt to explore what lay beneath the surface happened in the 1860s, when a British engineer named Charles Warren received permission to investigate the foundations of the mount. What he found was remarkable. Crawling through narrow shafts and ancient tunnels, Warren documented a labyrinth of chambers, water channels, and passages carved directly into the bedrock. He glimpsed rooms that had been sealed for centuries, staircases that descended into darkness, and architectural features that defied easy explanation. His report sparked a wave of speculation about what else might be hidden below. But before a full investigation could be conducted, the doors were slammed shut. The political and religious stakes were simply too high. The mount would remain unexplored. For more than a century, that prohibition held. Researchers could only speculate about the subterranean world beneath the sacred platform.
We have a game-changing archaeological discovery to share with you right from the shadows of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem.
This little pendant of a menorah.
Local legends spoke of vast, echoing voids, of treasure chambers filled with temple artifacts, of secret passages that connected the mount to distant parts of the city. But these were dismissed by serious scholars as folklore, the kind of exaggerated tales that accumulate around any ancient holy site. The scientific consensus was clear. Whatever lay beneath the Temple Mount would remain unknown, possibly forever. And then, in the late 1990s, someone made a catastrophic mistake. Thrown away. The details of what happened remain controversial to this day. Construction crews working on the mount, allegedly without proper archaeological supervision or permits, began excavating a large underground area. The work continued for months, largely out of public view, and when it was finished, hundreds of truckloads of earth had been removed from one of the most historically significant sites in human history and dumped unceremoniously in the Kidron Valley outside the city walls. Just like that, thousands of years of stratified history, the kind of layered archaeological record that takes painstaking decades to properly excavate and document, was treated like construction debris. The academic community was horrified. This was not just a loss for Israeli archaeology or Jewish history. This was a loss for all of humanity, a destruction of irreplaceable evidence from one of the most important sites in the ancient world. Most people assumed that whatever had been in that earth was gone forever, scattered and contaminated beyond any hope of recovery. But a small group of researchers refused to accept that verdict. In 2004, They launched what would become known as the Temple Mount Sifting Project, an audacious attempt to salvage what had been thrown away. The concept was simple, but almost impossibly labor-intensive. They would collect the discarded earth, transport it to a controlled site, and sift through it by hand, bucket by bucket, handful by handful, searching for anything that had survived the destruction. The work was slow, tedious, and unglamorous. Volunteers spent countless hours under the Mediterranean sun, running dirt through mesh screens, examining every pebble and fragment that emerged. At first, the finds were modest: pottery shards, animal bones, fragments of ancient glass.
But here we find many, many pottery jars which are stamped with what looks to be an X. But when we look at our chart, X in the ancient world is the letter Tuf of today.
Interesting to specialists, but nothing that would rewrite history books. Then the seals began to appear. Seals of truth. In the ancient world, seals were used to authenticate documents and mark ownership. A person would press their unique seal into soft clay, leaving an impression that served as a kind of signature. These tiny clay impressions, called bullae, are among the most valuable artifacts an archaeologist can find because they often preserve actual names from the past, names that can sometimes be cross-referenced with ancient texts. The sifters found dozens of them, and when the inscriptions were deciphered, the implications were staggering. One bulla bore the name Gali-Yahu, son of Immer. In the Hebrew Bible, Immer is listed as a priestly family that served in Solomon's temple. This tiny piece of clay, no larger than a fingernail, was physical proof that a person mentioned in ancient scripture had actually existed, had actually walked the stones of the temple, had actually pressed this seal with their own hand 3,000 years ago. More seals emerged with names matching other priestly families recorded in ancient texts. Some featured symbols associated with temple service, images of gates, ceremonial objects, ritual garments. The researchers were not just finding artifacts anymore. They were finding the fingerprints of the people who had operated one of the most famous religious institutions in human history. For years, skeptics had argued that the first temple was more legend than fact, a story exaggerated over centuries of retelling. These seals suggested otherwise. The names were real. The people were real. The temple was real. Among the finds was an ivory comb, still intact after nearly 3 millennia, with an inscription about ritual purity. There were bronze implements used for temple service, still bearing traces of ancient fires. There were fragments of decorated floor tiles, jewelry that may have adorned priests and worshippers, and coins spanning multiple empires that had ruled the mount over the centuries. Each object was like a crack in a wall of historical uncertainty, letting light into chambers that had been dark for too long. But the sifting project revealed something else, something that would point toward an even more dramatic discovery. As the researchers cataloged where different artifacts appeared in the dumped earth, a pattern emerged. The objects were not randomly distributed. They seemed to cluster in ways that suggested they had originated from a specific location, a location that had collapsed or been deliberately buried. The pattern pointed toward sealed chambers that had remained untouched for over 1,000 years. The question was no longer whether hidden spaces existed beneath the mount. The question was what they contained. X-raying the temple. For decades, the technology to peer beneath the surface of the Temple Mount simply did not exist, at least not in a form that could be used without physical excavation. Ground-penetrating radar and other sensing technologies were too crude, too limited in range, or too unreliable to produce meaningful results through dozens of meters of stone and fill. But technology does not stand still. In early 2023, a new research team arrived in Jerusalem with equipment that would have seemed like science fiction to Charles Warren. They deployed the latest generation of ground-penetrating radar, capable of detecting anomalies deep beneath the surface with unprecedented resolution. They used muon tomography, the same technology that had revealed.
Even though it's 4,500 years old, the Great Pyramid of Giza still has some secrets. Recently, we discovered a new one, and we did it using subatomic particles from space.
The hidden void inside the Great Pyramid of Giza just a few years earlier. Muons are subatomic particles that rain down constantly from the upper atmosphere, passing through solid matter at different rates depending on its density. By placing detectors in strategic locations and measuring how muons traveled through the mount, the researchers could effectively create an X-ray of the entire structure without moving a single stone. They focused their initial efforts on the southern slope of the mount, a region where the bedrock drops sharply toward the ancient city of David. This area had long been suspected of harboring hidden spaces, but no one had ever been able to confirm what lay beneath. When the data began coming in, the researchers could hardly believe what they were seeing. The scans revealed geometric shapes where nature should have produced only irregular stone. There were rectangular voids, linear passages, what appeared to be stairways descending into the bedrock. These were not natural formations. These were man-made structures, preserved in the darkness for millennia. When the team overlaid their modern radar data onto the hand-drawn maps that Charles Warren had produced in the 1860s, the results were extraordinary. The features matched with surgical precision. The hallways Warren had glimpsed through narrow shafts, the blocked passages he had been unable to explore, the chambers he had only theorized about. All of them appeared on the digital scans exactly where his century-old drawings predicted they would be. The Victorian explorer had been right. There was a hidden world beneath the Temple Mount. And now, for the first time in history, researchers had a clear map of how to reach it. The descent. Working within a legal excavation zone just outside the primary retaining walls of the mount, the team began the painstaking work of clearing centuries of accumulated debris. Layer by layer, they removed the fill deposited by Ottoman, Crusader, and Byzantine-era builders. Each stratum told its own story: fragments of medieval pottery, Crusader-era iron fittings, Byzantine coins worn smooth by time. The researchers documented everything meticulously, knowing that the academic world would scrutinize every claim they made. And then, several meters below the modern surface, they hit something solid. It was a staircase, carved directly into the natural bedrock with a precision that spoke of serious architectural intent. The steps were worn smooth in the center, polished by countless feet over countless years. This was not a minor passage or a drainage channel. This was a major access point, a formal entrance to something important. The staircase descended at a steep angle, leading down toward the heart of the mount. At its base, the researchers found a doorway, partially collapsed but still recognizable. And beyond the doorway, there was a chamber. The air inside was remarkably still and dry, preserved by the natural climate control of deep stone. On the walls, the researchers could make out faint carvings, crosses and Greek letters that dated the most recent use of this space to the Byzantine period, perhaps the 4th or 5th century CE. At some point, this had been a secret place of Christian worship, hidden away during an era of religious upheaval. But the Byzantine layer was only skin deep. When the researchers examined the floor more closely, they noticed irregularities, places where the surface did not quite match the surrounding stone. Careful probing revealed that the Byzantine occupants had laid their floor over something older, something they may not have fully understood themselves. Beneath the Byzantine plaster lay massive foundation stones, some weighing several tons, cut with a technique called marginal drafting that is the hallmark of the highest level of ancient royal architecture. The precision was staggering. These stones had been shaped and placed with tolerances that would challenge modern equipment, and their alignment was not arbitrary. When the researchers mapped the orientation of these foundations, They found that it corresponded precisely with the sacred geometries described in biblical texts, the proportions of the temple, the orientation of the Holy of Holies, the mathematical relationships that were supposed to govern the dwelling place of the divine. They had found the foundations of Solomon's temple, not in fragments scattered through dump trucks, but in place, exactly where ancient sources said they would be. It was the kind of discovery that comes along once in a generation, the kind that redefines entire fields of study. But this was only the beginning, because at the far end of the chamber, barely visible in the dim light, there was another staircase, and this one was blocked. The sealed door. The second staircase did not simply collapse. It was deliberately, systematically sealed. Heavy stones had been wedged into the passage at odd angles, then cemented in place with a crude but effective mortar. The blockage was not the work of erosion or earthquake. It was the work of human hands, hands that were clearly in a hurry, hands that wanted to make absolutely certain that no one would ever pass through this doorway again. In archaeology, you learn to read the intentions of the past through physical evidence. A doorway that collapses naturally looks very different from a doorway that is deliberately sealed. Natural collapse is chaotic, random, following the path of least resistance. Deliberate sealing is purposeful, strategic, designed to resist future attempts at entry. This blockage was unquestionably deliberate. Someone, at some point in antiquity, had decided that whatever lay beyond this staircase needed to stay hidden. The question that haunted the researchers was simple. Why? What were they trying to protect? Or what were they trying to contain? Preliminary scans of the area beyond the blockage revealed something unexpected. The walls of the chamber on the other side appeared to be lined with sheets of metal, copper, or bronze.
A bronze penny turned up during minor restoration on a part of the Hasmonean-era wall running through the citadel's courtyard,
with traces of lead in certain areas. These materials made no sense in the context of a simple storeroom or tomb. Lead and copper serve very specific purposes in construction. They block radiation, they prevent corrosion, they provide electromagnetic shielding. Why would ancient builders go to such lengths to line a subterranean chamber with these materials? What were they trying to keep in or keep out? Hydraulic mysteries. While one team focused on the sealed staircase, another shifted their attention to a different mystery: the water system. In the ancient world, water was far more than a resource for drinking and washing. It was the medium of purification, the substance that separated the sacred from the profane. The temple in Jerusalem was famous for its elaborate rituals of cleansing, rituals that required vast quantities of pure water delivered to precise locations at precise times. What the researchers mapped was not a simple aqueduct or cistern system. It was an engineering marvel that defied easy explanation. Kilometers of channels had been carved into solid bedrock, lined with a sophisticated hydraulic plaster that had remained watertight for nearly 3,000 years. The channels were not uniform. Some were designed to maintain constant flow rates. Others featured primitive but effective pressure regulation systems. There were overflow valves, settling basins, and distribution networks that would not look out of place in a modern water treatment facility. The scale of the system was staggering. Conservative estimates suggested it could hold millions of gallons, far more than would be needed for ritual washing, even during the busiest festival periods when hundreds of thousands of pilgrims would have crowded the temple courts. If the system was purely for religious purification, it was vastly over-engineered. This suggested that the water served another purpose, one that the ancient builders considered important enough to justify such an enormous investment of labor and resources. One of the more radical theories emerging from this discovery involves acoustic engineering. Some researchers have noted that water moving through stone channels at high pressure can create low-frequency vibrations, sounds that are felt in the body more than heard with the ears. If the temple's water system was designed to create these vibrations at specific frequencies, It could have induced profound physical and psychological effects in worshippers standing on the platforms above. The temple would not have been just a building. It would have been a massive instrument, humming with a frequency designed to alter consciousness and create a sense of divine presence. Others have gone even further, pointing to the high quartz content of the Judean limestone and the way the water channels are grounded into the bedrock. Quartz is piezoelectric, meaning it generates small electrical charges when subjected to mechanical stress. Could the ancient builders have been attempting to harness some form of natural electrical phenomenon? Was the temple a kind of massive battery, collecting and concentrating energies that we are only now beginning to understand? The mathematical precision of the channel alignments makes it difficult to dismiss these questions entirely. Whatever the builders were doing, they were doing it with intention and extraordinary skill. The Ark Theory. All of these discoveries inevitably lead back to the most famous mystery in biblical archaeology, the Ark of the Covenant. According to ancient texts, the Ark was a gold-covered wooden chest that contained the tablets of the Ten Commandments and served as the throne of God's presence on earth. It was kept in the Holy of Holies, the innermost chamber of the temple, and was so sacred that touching it meant instant death. The Ark was the heart of Israelite worship, the physical anchor of their covenant with the divine, and then it vanished. The traditional narrative says the Ark was captured by the Babylonians when they destroyed the first temple in 586 BCE, or that it was destroyed in the fires of the siege.
The Babylonian soldiers slaughter the people of the city and wreak destruction everywhere. The cries of pain of the victims, many of them women, children, and the elderly, are heard from every corner.
But here is what troubles historians. The Babylonians were meticulous record keepers, and their accounts of the temple's treasures make no mention of the Ark. They list gold vessels, silver implements, ceremonial objects of all kinds, but not the most important artifact in the entire structure. If they had captured the Ark, they would have boasted about it. If they had destroyed it, they would have recorded the destruction. The silence in the record suggests a third possibility. The Ark was not there when the Babylonians arrived. Some researchers believe the Ark was moved before the siege, hidden in a prepared location where it could survive the coming destruction. The temple priests would have had advance warning of the Babylonian invasion. They would have had time to protect their most sacred possession. And where better to hide something than in chambers carved deep into the bedrock beneath the temple itself, chambers that could be sealed and forgotten, waiting for a day of restoration that has not yet come. The sealed staircase, the copper-lined chamber beyond, the deliberate and desperate nature of the blockage. All of this takes on new significance in light of the Ark theory. If the ancient priests were not just hiding a religious artifact, but containing something genuinely powerful, something that the biblical texts describe as lethal to the unprepared, then the engineering choices begin to make sense. The metal shielding, the isolation deep underground, the permanent seal. These are the choices you make when you are dealing with something dangerous, something that demands absolute containment. The final look. The researchers are now preparing for what they call the final look. Using ultra-thin fiber optic cameras, the kind used in medical endoscopy, and micro-drones smaller than a hummingbird, they intend to thread through the microscopic gaps in the blocked staircase. The goal is to see what lies on the other side without moving a single stone, without breaking the seal that has held for 3 millennia. The technology is delicate, and the margins for error are essentially zero. One wrong move could trigger a collapse that would bury the discovery forever. There is a palpable sense of dread mixed with excitement in the research camp. At night, after the equipment is shut down and the data is backed up, the team sits in silence, staring at the preliminary images on their screens. They know they are on the edge of something unprecedented. They also know that some discoveries cannot be undiscovered, that some doors, once opened, change everything that follows. The data from these discoveries is still being processed by supercomputers and AI models around the world. The preliminary findings have already sent shockwaves through academic circles, though the full implications have yet to reach the general public. We are no longer guessing based on fragments of pottery and faded scrolls. We are looking at subsurface imaging that reveals a city beneath the city, an infrastructure of astonishing sophistication, and a sealed chamber that someone went to extraordinary lengths to hide from history. Beneath Jerusalem, the seals still hold, but not for long. The stones remain exactly where they were placed by those who believed some things were too dangerous to uncover, and the water still moves through channels carved 3,000 years ago. Cameras are inching closer, the silence is thinning, and history is beginning to shift beneath our feet. When that final barrier is breached, it won't just reveal what was hidden. It will reveal why it was hidden. And when the door finally opens, will it change what we know about the past or what we believe? About ourselves? I will see you in the next one.